A quiet transformation is taking place, and few notice it, not because it is loud, but because of its subtle nature. There is a growing group of individuals who haven't become cold or bitter. They have made a conscious choice: solitude. This doesn't stem from hatred, fear of connection, or a lost capacity to love. They chose isolation after learning through practice what it feels like to be emotionally exploited repeatedly. These people don't announce their departure. They don't post justifications or start conflicts. They don't give speeches about boundaries or make dramatic exits from social circles. They simply go silent. They stop explaining themselves and respond less. They disappear from places where they were once a guaranteed presence. Externally, it looks like indifference. Internally, it is an indescribable self-preservation. Something shifted deep within. A realization settled into the nervous system, not as an idea, but as a certainty. Being with others became heavier than being alone. Dialogues began to carry an invisible cost. Emotional proximity stopped nourishing and became transactional. Every interaction brought the risk of being more needed than known, valued for utility, not presence. Slowly, without fanfare, isolation became safer than attachment. What makes this rupture imperceptible is the absence of catastrophic events. There is no obvious trauma now, no explicit betrayals or fights to justify the withdrawal. Just the quiet decision to no longer put oneself in situations where emotional energy is drained without care. The resolution to no longer be the dumping ground where others unload, depend, and leave. To an observer, it looks like effective distancing. To those living it, it's like breathing without constriction for the first time. It is preferring peace over repetition. It isn't the punishment of isolation, it is withdrawal as lucidity. An internal line was crossed where the price of being used outweighed the fear of loneliness. If this touches you, support this space by liking the video, subscribing, and commenting on your journey. Your account might be the confirmation someone needs to understand they aren't broken, but protecting something valuable. Mary Ainsworth would not see this retreat as a character flaw or an inability to bond. She would identify it as something precise, an adaptive response of the attachment system after recurring emotional misuse. In her view, the human nervous system is not sentimental. It is intelligent and records patterns. When proximity results in exhaustion or a lack of reciprocity, the system doesn't complain, it adjusts. Ainsworth's work showed that attachment isn't about how much you desire connection, but whether that connection proved to be safe. When it isn't, distance becomes self-regulation. Choosing solitude in this context is not an escape. It is the organism acting according to its biology, reducing exposure to what hurts. There is no pathology in this only applied memory. The inclination toward isolation is not a blockage, but a calibration. The system stopped testing, it accumulated data and now protects. What society labels as distance is often misinterpreted. When someone goes silent or becomes less available, it is judged that something failed internally. They say you closed yourself off, built walls, or fear intimacy. But this judgment assumes that proximity is always safe, and withdrawal is always fear. It ignores history. What looks like avoidance is often recognition. The body remembers what the mind no longer needs to analyze. It remembers conversations where it was never heard, and bonds where care was conditional. Over time, the nervous system stops confusing endurance with connection. It learns the difference between being open and being exposed. It is not fear that dictates distance. Fear is chaotic. This retreat is calm and deliberate. It is born of clarity, not panic. Emotional memory has fulfilled its role. The system refuses patterns that lead to exhaustion. It chooses space not to punish but to avoid the cycle. Distance here is practical discernment. At a certain point, the nervous system stops asking and concludes. It learns through repetition. When a bond means being used for emotional labor or being abandoned after losing utility, the body records a rule. Proximity is risk. This learning doesn't happen in words, but in muscle tension and short breaths. Externally, it looks like a lifestyle. Internally, it's a protective reflex. The body doesn't seek isolation because it dislikes people, but because of what it learned about proximity in the past. Solitude is the only environment where vigilance relaxes. Alone, there is no need to monitor others' moods or anticipate demands. This is the hidden mechanism of the retreat. It is not the rejection of affection, but of a pattern where loving meant self-nullification. The system seeks safety until intimacy proves it can exist without exploitation or invasion. Distance remains the most reliable regulation. A moment comes when the veil falls and the person realizes something new. They were always others' emotional escape, the disposal site for others' insecurities. It isn't a bombshell revelation, but a painful clarity. The truth hits undeniably. Every relationship was a transaction where their resources were sucked dry. What felt like connection now sounds like exploitation. This awakening is definitive. Once the pattern is seen, it cannot be ignored. The innocence of exchanges breaks. The supposed mutuality is revealed as a unilateral dynamic. The emotional effort and the disrespect for boundaries become clear. There is no going back to the naivety that every bond is balanced. From then on, one cannot fake ignorance or act as if nothing changed. The perception of care and proximity is altered forever. The ability to ignore these dynamics vanishes, leaving only the choice to confront the truth or distance oneself, to save one's own integrity. The cost of this consciousness is high and felt deeply. After recognizing the imbalance, vigilance becomes a constant companion. It's not just about noticing the wear and tear, but living in uninterrupted alert. Every interaction is filtered, seeking signs of manipulation or inconsistency. The body no longer relaxes in others' presence. There is a readiness to retreat at the slightest sign of dissonance. Being with people becomes a weight. Trivial conversations exhaust because they demand an energy that no longer feels safe to donate. Dynamics that were once invisible now require total attention, making the effort unsustainable. Eventually, the cost of socializing outweighs the peace of isolation. Being alone, once avoided, becomes a refuge. There, the mind and body rest from the exhaustion of monitoring the other. Solitude is the space to recover one's axis, while the social environment feels like swimming against the current. The price of consciousness is high and, in the end, the shelter of solitude is less costly than the work of keeping one's guard up in relationships. In this phase, the choice is not between comfort and discomfort, but between self-betrayal and self-preservation. Accepting draining relationships would be reopening old wounds. It would require silencing internal alarms and giving access to those who take more than they offer. This isn't resilience. It's repeating trauma under the name of loyalty. The alternative is solitude, chosen with weight but necessary. It has its voids, but it doesn't violate the being. It doesn't demand emotional effort in exchange for belonging, nor does it ask you to diminish yourself to maintain the bond. In solitude, the person remains whole. This is where the dilemma ends. The psyche understands that repeating damage is no longer an option. Isolating becomes survival. It is deciding to stop offering the internal world to those who don't know how to keep it. Being alone is not rejecting love, but refusing to bleed in silence for connection. At the core of this withdrawal are marks that many live with but do not name. Invisible scars formed not by a single event but by repetition. They arise when emotional use becomes the norm, when affection is conditional and care unequal. These marks don't scream. They appear as hesitation before surrender, or as a tightness in the chest when someone approaches. They live in the attachment system. Each is the remnant of a bitter lesson, that loving required sacrifice and that being useful mattered more than being seen. This is why solitude is misunderstood. It is not avoiding the other, but recognizing these marks. The psyche knows that new bonds without healing lead to repetition. Instead of diagnoses, see these as protective impressions. Each scar is an adaptation that kept the person emotionally alive. The tragedy is not their existence, but their invisibility. From the outside, they see distance. Inside, there is a history of ignored availability and a lack of reciprocity. Solitude is the only place where these wounds aren't reopened. If this resonates, subscribe and share your story. Naming the invisible is the first step, and your account might help others understand that withdrawal is not a flaw, but a response shaped by survival. You see this in daily life. The person who listens with attention, but notices that when they speak, others' interest vanishes. They become the emotional container, rarely the one embraced, a role imposed on them by time. It is the one who receives messages only in crises or needs. Weeks of silence end when someone needs their support. They aren't sought for who they are, but for what they provide. Once the urgency passes, the bond cools. There are also those who vanish without notice, not out of malice but exhaustion. They learned that explaining feelings brought no understanding, only denial or fleeting changes. Silence became the clearest language. None of this is dramatic. There is no accusation, only the calm observation of patterns and the conservation of energy. Withdrawal isn't bitterness, it's realism. It is stopping the offer of depth where it was never accepted. Solitude is not isolation. Isolation is tense and lonely. Solitude is silent and liberating. Upon entering solitude, those who were overburdened feel immediate relief. The body relaxes and vigilance yields. There are no others' moods to manage or expectations to predict. Alone, the body needs no defense. There is no performance or obligation to be available beyond the limit. The system rests from the search for intrusions. It isn't withdrawal due to fear, but regulation through the absence of threat. In solitude, attention turns inward without demands. The pace slows down. The person doesn't feel cut off from humanity, but returned to themselves. What looks like distance is, internally, a return to safety. Solitude is the environment, where the bond with oneself is not negotiated and where the nervous system rediscovers calm. If the environment is unstable, the attachment system adapts. It's an ancestral pattern of survival. When proximity brings volatility, the organism understands that investing is dangerous. Exposure is reduced by intelligence, saving energy where it would be lost. It is the archetype of necessary withdrawal. Beings retreat under instability. It isn't avoidance, it's balance. The system stops searching, because searching brings no repair. Distance does. Seen this way, withdrawal isn't a lack of capacity to love, but a strategy. The organism doesn't reject affection, only the version of it that requires constant sacrifice. The retreat shows the system has learned and no longer waste resources on infertile soil. It isn't collapse, it's adaptive intelligence acting effectively. There is the myth that those who choose solitude hope to be rescued or proved wrong. This is false. The withdrawal is not an expectation-filled wait, but a state of discernment. These people aren't waiting to be pulled back. Any return to intimacy wouldn't come through pressure or insistence, but through conditions previously absent. Safety must be felt, reciprocity demonstrated, and boundaries respected without fights. Without this, proximity loses its appeal. This change is profound. Connection is no longer sought out of need, but becomes a choice made only when the environment proves capable of sustaining. And until then, solitude is a good to be protected. What changes isn't the capacity to care, but the target and quality of that care. They don't become icy, they become selective. Energy once infinite is now intentional. This choice is born of self-respect. When they choose to connect, it isn't performative, it's real. They listen deeply and invest with loyalty, but reserve this for where there is emotional safety. They don't want to be anyone's everything, nor maintain bonds that depend only on them. The focus shifts from availability to authenticity. Instead of fragmenting into empty exchanges, they bring clarity to a few spaces. This makes their presence rare and more valuable. They don't offer pieces. When they act whole, guided by boundaries and an understanding of what affection should be. This process has a logical arc. Emotional use leaves marks. The system alerts to the error. The person tries to ignore it until the body demands withdrawal to prevent more damage. The distance leads to conscious solitude, where distance is a choice. There, the nervous system stabilizes and patterns become clear. The I is no longer fragmented by the other. What emerges is coherence. Energy returns, boundaries firm up, and identity consolidates. It isn't regression, it's reorganization. The attachment system recalibrates over safety and self-respect. The being preserves itself by aligning connection with health. What looks like a disappearance is the restoration of wholeness. You don't need to prove you are warm or give access to your inner self to justify yourself. Your system knows what it lived and understands when it is safe or not to approach. This knowledge comes from experience in the body, not logic. Feeling good alone is not a moral failure, selfishness, or an inability to love. It means your system has learned discernment. It stopped confusing exposure with intimacy and effort with connection. There is wisdom in that. You can wait, be selective, and choose peace. Solitude here is not a problem to be solved, but a protective space to remain regulated. Trust that when safety is real, opening up won't need to be forced. Some retreat not for lack of love, but for having learned too early the cost of loving without return. The price of giving and staying empty became high. It wasn't a lack of desire, but the realization that the love offered required more than they could pay. This conclusion brings no drama, but a deep peace. They learned their energy must be treated with the same zeal they offer. They didn't stop loving. They learned to love themselves enough not to give themselves away where there is no value. There is no rush for change. This calm withdrawal protects what is essential. It is knowing when to offer and when to save, trusting that real connection will find its way. This space is for those who chose solitude through awareness. For those who saw that, to save their peace and authenticity, they needed to withdraw from where they were drained. For those who don't seek external approval but strength in reflection, you are not alone. Many have walked this path of boundaries and self-respect. Don't apologize for the distance. It is an act of care, not selfishness. If this makes sense, like, subscribe, and comment. Your voice helps others understand that withdrawal is not a defect, but a response shaped by survival.